All right, let's dive right in today. We're tackling Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. This book, oh man, it's been a bestseller for years, and it's really known for stirring up some serious conversation about money and wealth. And where it all begins is with this really simple question: what does it really take to get rich?
Hmm.
And Kiyosaki, he kind of tackles this question by sharing his experiences growing up with two dads, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about the book is how he uses this whole two dads setup. It really lets him highlight these two completely different mindsets about money.
Yeah, it's like we're right there watching these two different financial philosophies clash, right? So
Hmm.
we've got poor dad, who is actually Kiyosaki's real father. He's highly educated, went to school, got the degrees, and really believes in working hard for a steady paycheck. I mean, that sounds pretty familiar, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But then there's rich dad, his friend's father, who's this self-made entrepreneur, and his view on wealth. Totally different.
And that's the core of it all, right? That contrast. Poor dad takes that traditional path, while rich dad is completely unconventional in his approach. And I think that's what makes you question everything you thought you knew about money, honestly.
Absolutely. And Kiyosaki, he doesn't try to soften it at all. He straight up calls poor dad's path the rat race. You work hard, you pay your bills, but you never really get ahead. And Rich Dad argues that's because people are just focusing on the wrong things.
Exactly. And if you zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. Rich Dad's main point is that it's not how much you make, it's what you do with it that counts. And that leads us right into one of the biggest lessons from the book: assets versus liabilities.
Okay, yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. Rich Dad says that rich people, they don't just work for money. They make their money work for them. They buy assets, things that put money into their pockets. But the poor and the middle class, they often end up with liabilities. And those are things that just drain your bank account.
Right. So think about it. An asset is like this little money-making machine working for you, even when you're not actually working. That's how the rich get richer.
Whoa, yeah, it's like a total mind shift, right? And Kiyosaki, he uses this example of a house, which I thought was really interesting. Most people think of their house as an asset, right?
Yeah.
But Rich Dad, he argues that if you have a mortgage, it's often a liability because
Yeah.
you're constantly shelling out money for it.
Mm.
Makes you really rethink what you consider an asset in your own life, huh?
Totally. And then he gets into this idea of minding your own business, which can be a little confusing. He's not just saying, like, go start a company. What Rich Dad is really talking about is building up your own asset column, totally separate from your job.
Yeah, so it's like building your own financial empire piece by piece, one asset at a time. And Rich Dad, he actually put Kiyosaki to work in his businesses for low wages, too. Not to take advantage, though. It was about teaching him how to manage money and spot good opportunities. It's all about getting that financial education that we don't really get in regular schools.
Yeah, it's almost like an apprenticeship for becoming wealthy, which is pretty cool.
Uh,
And remember how Kiyosaki actually started his very first business when he was only 9? He was renting out comic books.
yeah,
It's a small thing, but it shows that you can start developing those money skills really early on.
it's Rich Dad's philosophy in action, for sure. Now, another key lesson from the book is this idea of mastering the system. Kiyosaki, he gets into taxes, corporations, all of that. He argues that wealthy people, they really understand how to use these systems to their advantage.
Right, and that's where things can get a bit controversial. He even brings up Robin Hood as an example. Rich Dad actually disliked the Robin Hood story because he felt like it was promoting this idea of unfairly taxing the rich, who, in his view, are the ones creating jobs and helping the economy. Whether you agree with him or not, it definitely makes you think differently about wealth and taxes.
Oh, it definitely challenges some common beliefs, that's for sure. So we've got working for money versus making money work for you. We've got assets versus liabilities and this idea of minding your own business. But there's another really important piece: financial education. And Rich Dad constantly emphasizes how traditional education just misses the mark here.
He's so right. Like, we spend years learning about history and science. But how many people graduate actually knowing how to manage their money? Or how to invest wisely? Or even what compound interest is? It's like we're almost set up to be financially illiterate.
It's almost like we're just expected to figure it out on our own, which is crazy. But Rich Dad, he says it doesn't have to be that way. We can take control of our financial education, just like we take control of anything else in our lives.
It's about empowering yourself with knowledge, really understanding how money works. And this is a great first step. Just by listening to this deep dive, you're already taking charge.
Exactly. So are you ready to go even deeper? Because Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it doesn't stop there.
We've covered some of the core principles from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but now I want to get into something that really stood out to me: the courage to actually take action.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to understand these concepts, but you got to actually use them, right? Kiyosaki talks a lot about overcoming fear, especially when it comes to money.
He does. And, fear can be a huge roadblock to becoming financially free.
Hmm.
Fear of failing, fear of taking a risk, even fear of what other people will think. It can really stop people from making smart decisions and taking advantage of opportunities.
It's easy to get stuck in that mindset of play it safe. I get it. But Rich Dad, he's all about trying something different. Remember that story about Kiyosaki's first business, renting out comic books? It wasn't a big, complicated thing, but it taught him so much about managing money and being proactive.
Exactly. And it shows how you don't need to start with something huge to make progress. Small steps, over time, they really add up, especially when you combine them with all this financial knowledge we've been talking about.
Now, Kiyosaki, he doesn't just focus on mindset. He actually gives specific examples of how to build wealth. Real estate, starting businesses, even some less traditional ways that might surprise you.
Right, and he makes this point that inventing money isn't about some secret formula or get-rich-quick scheme. It's more about using your financial intelligence, seeing those opportunities that other people miss.
Can you give us an example from the book?
Sure. He tells this story about Rich Dad buying this rundown property for super cheap. He fixes it up and then, bam, sells it for a huge profit. He didn't just stumble upon a pile of money, he created wealth by seeing an opportunity and actually doing something about it.
Wow, that's such a great illustration. It's about being resourceful,
Huh.
thinking outside the box, being creative.
Exactly. Now, it's important to remember that not everyone agrees with everything Kiyosaki says. Some people think his approach is too simple, or that it doesn't really take into account how complicated the world really is.
Right, and it's worth mentioning that Kiyosaki's background is in entrepreneurship and investing,
Hmm.
so his strategies might not be the best fit for everyone, especially people who aren't comfortable with risk or prefer a more traditional approach.
Definitely. But even if you don't agree with everything he says, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is still a really useful tool to help you think critically about money. It challenges your own assumptions, which is always a good thing.
It's all about taking what works for you, right? Adapting it to your own situation. And just keep learning and growing because financial literacy, it's a lifelong process.
It is, absolutely. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this. Don't be afraid to question the status quo when it comes to money. Think differently, explore new possibilities. It's all out there.
And don't be afraid to take action. Even those small steps, they can add up to big results in the long run. Now, as we wrap things up, I want to bring it all home. What are the big takeaways, the things that could actually change someone's financial life?
Well, I think the most important thing is shifting your mindset. Moving away from that idea that you have to work for money and instead embracing this concept of making your money work for you. That's really at the heart of what Rich Dad is all about.
Yeah, and that shift starts with understanding how powerful assets can be, right? Building up that asset column, whether it's through real estate or a side business, or even just investing your money wisely.
Exactly. It's all about creating this system where your money generates more money, even when you're not working. That's the whole idea of passive income.
Yeah, like putting your money on autopilot, it's working for you 24/7 while you're out there enjoying your life. Now, another big takeaway is that financial education is crucial. Rich Dad, he really drives this point home throughout the entire book. He argues that the traditional school system, it doesn't teach us the things we need to know to really be successful financially.
He's absolutely right. We spend all this time learning about history and science. But how many of us actually graduate knowing how to manage our money or how to invest or even what compound interest is? It's almost like we're being set up to be financially dependent instead of financially free.
It's almost like we're expected to just figure it all out on our own, which is kind of crazy. But Rich Dad says it doesn't have to be that way.
Absolutely not.
We can take control of our financial education, just like we take control of anything else in our lives.
It's about empowering yourself, educating yourself, really taking the time to understand how money works.
And that ties into Rich Dad's whole idea of minding your own business.
Yeah.
It's about taking responsibility for your financial future, not just relying on a job.
Exactly. And seeking out mentors, reading books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, becoming financially literate.
One of the things that really stuck with me from the book was how much Rich Dad emphasized overcoming fear and taking risks.
Oh yeah, calculated risk, of course.
Right, of course, calculated risks. But he really believed that fear holds so many people back from achieving their goals, especially financially.
It's so easy to get stuck in your comfort zone, even when it's not really serving you. But Rich Dad was all about pushing Kiyosaki to get outside of that comfort zone, to embrace challenges and learn from his mistakes.
And that's a lesson that goes way beyond just money, right? It's about having the courage to pursue your dreams, even if it means taking a leap of faith or facing some uncertainty.
Exactly. And remember, achieving financial success, it's rarely a straight line. There will be bumps in the road, challenges, setbacks, but the key is to have that growth mindset. Learn from those experiences and just keep expanding your knowledge.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad, we want to leave you with one final thought. What is one small step you can take today to apply these principles to your own life? Maybe it's reading a book about personal finance or researching different ways to invest, or even just having a conversation with a friend or family member about your financial goals. The important thing is to take action, to start moving in the direction you want to go, towards financial freedom and building the life you want. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.